For sure. Is there any current discussion regarding possible consolidation of Latin America as a European Union?
There is periodically some consideration of that. It generally doesn't go very far. I guess the example most people cite is Mercosur, which is formed by Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay, and which had ambitions to being more than just a customs union, but to actually being a full free trade area. They are going to elect members of a Mercosur parliament. I think that election's in 2014. Mercosur was founded back in the 1990s, so it's taken a long time to make much progress beyond the most basic trade and customs issues. There is a Latin America, South America parliament to which countries periodically elect representatives. There's a lot of speechifying there. I don't think anybody, I'm sure no one in any Latin American country could name their representative to the South American parliament, right? It doesn't do very much. So now I have to say that I don't think there are any serious attempts to form Latin America or even South America into the kind of entity that the EU has become. Of course, it took the EU 50 years too, but I don't even see the sprouts of that in Latin America today.
Couple of questions on this. Please address graft and government corruption in Brazil and its impact on growth, and how will Boeing, your company, deal with this issue?
I can answer the first part, no. No, I mean, it's such a timely question because Dilma Rousseff has been in office almost 11 months, and she's lost 6 members of her cabinet, 5 to corruption, and 1 because he made some unfortunate statements about her on television. But 5 to corruption, right? And it's interesting how these ministers were let go, and I think kind of encouraging as to what happened. It's not that anybody in government set out to investigate the Ministry of Tourism or the Ministry of Sports to determine whether there was corruption. It was investigative journalists that called these issues to public attention. This was not news, really. There were certain places in the Brazilian government, and you generally know in governments, what ministries probably are more political sinecures, right? Where you put people that are more likely to take a payoff than others. You don't want them in the finance ministry, the serious places, right? The industry of ministry and commerce. So there had always been rumors about certain ministries in Brazil, as there are in many countries in the hemisphere. The difference was that when the information came to public light, Dilma acted, right? She said, not putting up with this crap, basically, and she got rid of them. She acted very swiftly and at some risk to her own political coalition. Because Brazil, there are, I think, 18 now parties in the Brazilian Congress. So to get anything done, you generally have to craft a coalition. She's got a pretty strong party base in the PT, but she still sometimes needs other parties to get legislation through. She has other party members in her cabinet to draw up legislation, to whip up support for her. So taking this kind of strong stand against corruption and weakening her own political coalition was a pretty gutsy thing to do. And I think the fact that a woman did it, frankly, is pretty admirable, and I'm very proud of that. I've seen U.S. companies deal with the issues of corruption in Latin America from the government side also. I think you're all aware of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which prohibits U.S. companies from paying bribes to get business. I've been involved in my government career in a couple of investigations of U.S. companies that have been caught up in violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. They were sorry, and my lesson from those investigations was any company that gets involved in that would be sorry, because the penalties are real and serious, both in an individual and a corporate level.
Will Boeing in Brazil be allowed to compete on an equal footing with domestic Brazilian companies in competing for government contracts?
we have a, yeah, I worked for PepsiCo. PepsiCo Foods and PepsiCo beverages, right? Because PepsiCo has Frito-Lay and Quaker, and then PepsiCo also has, Pepsi-Cola, right? And Sierra Mist and all. And there are two very different corporate cultures on the food and beverage side. Boeing has Boeing Commercial Air and Boeing Space and Defense Systems. Very different cultures, I'm learning. And both sides are involved in sales to Brazil. Commercial, certainly much more on the business side with the airlines, and defense systems sales to the government. There's no secret, the sales been going on the bidding process has been going on for a long time. Boeing is competing to sell advanced fighter planes, F-18s, to the Brazilian Air Force. The competition has been narrowed down, or down-selected, as I've learned the defense people say, down-selected for Boeing, the French, and the Swedes. So we're in that competition where there is no real Brazilian competitor. But, of course, there is a Brazilian aircraft manufacturer, Embraer, and it's getting more and more involved in the defense industry. So all companies that are still in the bidding process are looking at Embraer not as competition, but as a partner. How could Embraer contribute to the construction of these airplanes and to the design of certain components in the planes? This is a very important part of getting a contract in Brazil or any place else around the world. The industrial participation. What can you do in that country? What kind of jobs can you create? What kind of technology would you intend to transfer? How do you have that country and its industry play in your manufacturing process and in your sale to their government? My first act as president of Boeing in Brazil was, in fact, to sign an agreement with Embraer and with the State Research Institute of the state of Sao Paulo to design a sustainable biofuels industry for aviation. You will know that Brazil is a biofuels pioneer when it comes to ethanol for vehicles. It's possible to fly an F-18 or many other aircraft on biofuels. We've done it. What it's not possible to do right now is economically run any aircraft, commercial or defense or military, on biofuels. So how do you create that kind of an industry sustainable at a price point that airlines and militaries can actually afford? So that's the kind of partnership we're looking at with Brazil. We see Brazilian companies not so much as competitors, but as partners in the process.
You mentioned in your speech there were some difficulties in terms of growth because of education. But this question, is Brazil going to be the emerging China of the Western Hemisphere? And if so, what factors are driving it toward that status?
I've been bullish on Brazil before it was popular, or as someone commented to me, before there was any rational justification for it. I went to Brazil for the first time in 1984, and I was blown away by the potential of the country at that time. Did not return from 15 years, left in 87, went back as ambassador in 2002, and I would say I went back to Brazil, but not to the same country. They had just used that 15 years so well. There's a long way to go, and because Brazil's a democracy, it's sometimes harder to do things than in China, where things are directed, right? You need much more of a consensus to make change. But I do think that Brazil is emerged as a global actor. And we had this discussion in the Council on Foreign Relations report. Were we willing to call Brazil a global power? And we went back and forth, and I even had some reservations there. We ended up calling it a global player or a global actor several times. But I think it is increasingly becoming a global power and will merit that distinction very soon. It's likely to be the 5th largest economy in the world by 2015. I mean, that's, I think, amazing progress. One of my concerns, though, and this is why I like to talk about the region as a whole, is that Brazil, while it's willing to exert some leadership in Latin America, really does see itself as much more active on the global scene. So is it willing to bring the rest of the hemisphere along with it? How much patience will it have with other countries? And I think the record so far is pretty good, but I wonder whether at one point we start talking about, and one Brazilian told me this one time, ROLA, the rest of Latin America, right? Because I think there's some mixed feelings in Brazil about its place in the hemisphere.
This person is concerned about jobs here in the U.S. What would it take for all of these U.S. corporations to pour their resources and energy into helping save the U.S. economy rather than outsourcing their jobs? If you want to just comment about job outsourcing.
No, not really. No, no. This isn't a zero-sum game, right? This isn't either or, and I know that's so easy for me to stand up here and say because, I'm working, right? But I grew up in Pittsburgh and understand the Rooney family is represented here. I grew up in Pittsburgh. When I graduated from high school, a lot of the guys I graduated with planned to go into the steel mills, and that was going to be their life, right? They didn't need to go to college. Their dads had made perfectly good livings working in the mills, and they were going to do the same thing. And then we started importing steel from Brazil, but from Korea and from Mexico, and the bottom fell out of the industry in Pittsburgh. And there were guys I went to high school with who really didn't work for like 10 years. They might paint houses or fix up cars or something, but they didn't have a regular salaried job. Pittsburgh looked pretty sad in the mid-'70s. If you go back to Pittsburgh today, it's one of the United States' most livable cities. And in part it's livable because they developed new industry and new expertise, environmental sciences, medical industry, clean energy. So I think the United States has such tremendous strength that we're able to take that lesson I learned from Pittsburgh and play it out nationally and look for that cutting edge. Manufacturing jobs, I don't think manufacturing's ever coming back to this country in a massive way. But are there new things, and will it require better education? Absolutely. And will it take public-private partnership? Yeah. What can we do in the United States? Because we have the best minds here. Oh, and by the way, that includes immigrants who came to study at our universities and wanted to stay on here, and we were able to take advantage of their science and math and engineering skills because we let them stay. Because we have the best minds, we still are the most innovative. We still register. I talked about patent registration, register more patents here than any place else in the world. So I think government has to do its part, private sector has to do its part, but the world is too small to say we're going to do this or that. We have to take what we can from other markets as they're taking from us, and we have to do our job at home.
What are the differences professional women face in Latin America versus the U.S.?
There aren't a whole lot of Latin business women in the corporate sector in particular. There are a lot of Latin women in governments. There are many who have established their own very successful businesses. Some of them have inherited businesses and made them even more successful. I have to say, a 30-year government career, almost all of it in Latin America. I had one outside the area assignment. But I never felt discrimination in Latin America. Now, maybe I was just too naive. When I was first went to Latin America, I went to Mexico. I was 22 as a political officer, and people would tell me things, and I realized that after a while, they didn't think they were telling a political officer from the U.S. Embassy. They thought I was their girlfriend or something, and then I became their sister or maybe their mother eventually. But I'll tell you, the discrimination I did feel in my career from the United States, right, from the U.S. government, from the State Department. from my colleagues. Women in the Foreign Service, there was just 2 years before I joined the Foreign Service, a married woman still had to leave the Foreign Service, a woman had to leave the Foreign Service when she got married. So we talk about things that take a long time and little progress. But, we've gotten there, and we've had Madeleine Albright and Hillary Clinton and Condoleezza Rice setting the standard as Secretaries of State.
Last question. Is the American soccer team better than the Brazilian soccer team?
Men or women? Right? Thanks very much.